The encounter in the cold night. The night was heavy with silence. The ruins of the old colony stood like broken teeth against the pale light of two distant moons. Cold wind rushed through empty streets, carrying the smell of burned metal and forgotten fire. A human named Kale walked carefully, his boots crunching against shattered glass and stone. He was tired, his body aching after days of wandering through abandoned ground, but something in the air kept him alert. A sense that he was not alone. Kale was a simple man, a traveler who never wanted war or power. He had seen too much of both. His eyes searched the shadows, his hand never far from the knife at his belt. In places like this, scavengers, mercenaries, or worse, could be hiding. The colony had been attacked months ago, stripped of life by raiders and slavers. He had only come here searching for supplies, maybe old tech, maybe clean water, but what he found instead was something else, something that would change his life forever. At first, he thought the sound was the wind, a faint whimper, a soft cry carried by the night. He froze, listening. His heart beat harder. Slowly, he followed the sound, moving past collapsed walls and burnt vehicles. And there, hidden in the corner of a broken building, he saw her, a small alien girl, curled up against the cold stone. Her body shook violently, her hands gripping her thin clothes. Her skin shimmered faintly under the moonlight, pale with a strange silver tone. Her eyes, wide with terror, glowed faintly violet. She looked no older than 8 human years, though her alien features made it difficult to tell. Her breathing was shallow, her lips trembling from the cold. Kale stood still, his mind racing. She was not supposed to be here. Slavers never left children behind, and yet here she was, abandoned, frightened, and close to collapse. He stepped forward slowly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. The girl flinched, pressing back into the wall. Her small voice cracked as she whispered in broken trade language. "Please, do not take me back." Kale's chest tightened. He crouched down to her level, keeping his voice calm and soft. "I am not here to hurt you," he said. "I am just passing through." The girl's eyes searched his face. She did not trust easily, that much was clear. Kale slowly unfastened the heavy coat from his shoulders. The night air bit at his skin immediately, but he ignored it. He leaned forward and carefully wrapped the coat around her trembling body. The fabric swallowed her small frame. She blinked up at him, confused at the warmth. "There," Kale said quietly. "Better." The girl's tears glistened as she clutched the coat tighter. For a moment, her shaking slowed. Her breathing steadied just enough to let out a small sigh of relief. She whispered, Why would you help me?" Kale had no answer he could give. He did not know himself. He only knew that he could not walk away. Something about her reminded him of another small girl, one he had lost long ago. The memory pressed heavy on his chest. Before he could say anything, the ground trembled. A deep metallic sound echoed across the ruins. Kale's eyes snapped upward. In the distance, lights swept across the night, powerful beams cutting through dust and rubble. Voices carried on the wind, harsh and commanding. They were searching. The girl's eyes widened with terror. She gripped his sleeve with sudden strength. "They are coming," she whispered, "if they find me. They will kill you." Kale's mind sharpened instantly. His instincts screamed at him to leave, to save himself. But he looked at her, this fragile child hidden beneath his coat, and he could not abandon her. Not now, not ever. He pulled her gently to her feet. She stumbled, weak from cold and fear. He lifted her into his arms, feeling how light she was. "Hold on," he told her. "We have to move." The ruins came alive with danger. Lights flashed closer, metal footsteps clanged against stone. The hunters were sweeping the colony, searching every shadow. Every instinct told Kale he was running into something far bigger than he understood. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the trembling girl in his arms. He tightened his grip, pressed her against his chest to shield her from the wind, and began to run into the darkness. The night was no longer silent. It was filled with echoes of pursuit. The hunt had begun. The chase Kale moved quickly through the ruins, his boots striking against broken stone as he carried the trembling alien girl in his arms. Her weight was light, far too light, as though she had not eaten properly in days. Every breath she took was shaky, and her small hands clutched at his coat as if letting go would mean death. He could feel her heartbeat racing against his chest, and with each step, the sound of pursuit grew louder. Behind them, the harsh metallic voices of hunters rang through the night. Amplified by devices that made them sound less like men and more like machines, they called out in guttural alien tones, repeating the same command over and over. "Bring the girl back alive." Cale's mind raced as fast as his legs. He had no plan, no clear path out of the colony. But he had one advantage. He knew how to move unseen. Years of surviving war zones had taught him that shadows were better allies than weapons. He slipped between crumbling walls, ducked under fallen beams, and wove through alleys where firelight no longer reached. Still, the hunters pressed closer, their searchlights slicing through the dark, scanning every corner of the ruins like the gaze of predators. The girl whispered something against his chest, her words muffled. At first, Cale thought she was begging him to put her down and save himself, but when he listened closer, he realized she was trying to warn him. Her voice trembled as she spoke in broken words. They will not stop. They want me alive because of who I am." Her words confused him, but there was no time for questions. He only tightened his hold and kept running, his jaw set with grim determination. Ahead of him, the ruins opened into what once might have been a marketplace. Now it was nothing but shattered stalls and burned-out shelters. Cale slowed, his sharp eyes scanning the area. He knew open ground was a death trap, but there was no choice. The sound of pursuit was closing in from behind. He crossed quickly, but halfway through the open space, a flare of light burst across the street. A search drone swooped down, its red eye glowing as it scanned the rubble. Its mechanical voice barked coordinates, and in seconds the pounding of heavy boots thundered toward them. Cale swore under his breath and sprinted to the nearest cover. He slid behind the twisted remains of a transport cart, pulling the girl tightly against him. The drone hovered closer, its search beam cutting dangerously near. The girl buried her face into his chest, her trembling almost painful. Cale could feel her small body burning with fear. He raised a hand slowly, feeling for the knife at his belt. If the drone came any closer, he would have to strike fast and silent. But then a louder noise erupted. A group of hunters stomping into the square, their armor glinting faintly under the moonlight. Their weapons were long, sleek rifles humming with energy. Cale knew at once he could not fight them all, not with the child in his arms. He glanced around, searching desperately for an escape, and spotted a narrow gap between two collapsed buildings. It was dangerous, filled with sharp debris and unstable walls. But it was the only chance, he whispered to the girl, his voice steady even as his pulse raced. "Hold on to me. Do not make a sound." She nodded faintly, her violet eyes shining in the dark. Cale crouched low and began to move. His steps were careful but quick. Each time a hunter's beam swept across the rubble, he froze, waiting until it passed before darting forward again. The girl's breathing grew shallow, her small fingers digging into his arm. At last, he reached the gap. He slipped through, scraping his shoulder against jagged stone. The walls seemed ready to collapse on them at any moment, but somehow they squeezed through to the other side. The hunters' voices echoed behind them, confused for a moment before shouting in anger. The chase grew hotter. Cale ran again, but his strength was starting to fade. The girl's presence in his arms slowed him, and the hunters were relentless. He could hear their mechanical dogs now, creatures of steel and circuits with sensors built to track heat and sound. Their howls split the night. Chilling him to the bone, he ducked into another alley, pressed against the wall, and forced himself to breathe silently. The girl looked up at him, her lips trembling as she whispered, "You should leave me. If they take me, they will not chase you." Cale's jaw tightened. He shook his head firmly, whispering back, "Not happening. I am not leaving you." For a brief moment, her violet eyes widened, as if she could not understand why. Then her gaze softened, and though her body still trembled, her grip on him grew stronger. The footsteps grew closer, the dog's howls bouncing through the ruins. Cale knew he could not keep running blindly. He needed a plan. He needed to outsmart them. He scanned the alley and noticed a half-collapsed tower ahead. If he could climb it and cross to the other side, maybe he could throw the hunters off their trail. But it would mean climbing with the girl clinging to him, a dangerous and desperate move. Still, Cale had no other choice. He whispered again, "Trust me," and began to climb. His fingers dug into cracks of stone, his muscles straining under the weight of the girl and his own exhaustion. Below them, beams of light flashed as hunters entered the alley. Their voices rang out, confident that their prey was trapped. But Cale pulled higher, his breath harsh, the girl holding on tight. Suspense hung in the air as the hunters drew nearer, just steps away from the alley wall. If even one of them looked up, everything would be over. Cale gritted his teeth and climbed faster. The hunters' shadows stretched long across the walls below. Their dogs sniffed the ground, growling. The girl buried her face into his chest again. Cale whispered in the smallest breath, "Almost there." At the top, he pulled himself onto the broken ledge, sweat pouring down his face. He moved quickly across the stones, slipping into the darkness before the hunters could look up. Below, their angry voices cursed at the empty alley. The chase was far from over, but for now, Cale and the girl had escaped death again. Secrets revealed, Cale finally stopped when his legs could no longer carry him forward. His chest rose and fell heavily as he leaned against the cracked frame of a collapsed building. The girl still clung to him, her small body hidden beneath the folds of his coat. The cold night air cut into his skin, but his mind was focused only on her. He placed her gently on the ground and crouched low so they would not be seen through the shattered openings in the wall. His sharp eyes scanned the street. Searching for movement, the hunters had fanned out, their lights and metallic voices echoing from a distance. But he knew they would not give up. They would sweep this entire colony until they found her. The girl shivered, her silver-toned skin almost glowing faintly in the pale moonlight. Her violet eyes darted around in fear, and she pressed her small hands against the coat as though it was her only shield against the world. Cale's jaw clenched. He wanted answers, but he also wanted to calm her. His voice was firm yet gentle as he asked, "Why are they after you? Who are you really?" At first, the girl lowered her head, refusing to speak. Her lips trembled and she shook her head quickly as if silence was safer than truth. Cale placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and reassuring. "Listen, I cannot protect you if I do not know what I am up against. If you want me to keep you alive, I need to know." Her breath hitched. She hesitated for several long seconds before whispering words that made Cale's blood run cold. "They call me the Lost Heir. My mother. My mother is the Queen." Cale froze. His mind recoiled at the meaning of her words. This small, trembling child was not just any refugee. She was not a simple orphan left behind by slavers. She was the daughter of one of the most powerful rulers in the galaxy, a queen whose fleets stretched across stars, a ruler whose very name was enough to make entire systems kneel. He stared at her in disbelief, but her eyes were honest. Filled with both fear and shame, the girl continued, her voice fragile and shaking. "They took me because they wanted to break her. They thought if they had me, she would surrender her throne. But she did not. She searched for me, but I escaped. I ran. And now they hunt me to silence me forever. If they kill me, the Empire will believe I am dead, and my mother will be broken." Her small hands gripped the coat tightly as tears ran down her cheeks. "You should not have helped me if they find out you are with me. They will kill you without mercy." Cale felt a storm inside his chest. He wanted to deny it, to say she was wrong, that this was only the imagination of a scared child. But deep down, he knew it was the truth. It explained the relentless hunters. It explained the heavy patrols and the metallic dogs. They were not after a random child. They were after a symbol that could shake entire empires. He looked at her again, and though she was trembling and small, he could see the faint traces of nobility in her eyes, a quiet strength buried beneath fear. His instincts screamed at him to leave, to walk away before it was too late. He had wandered into a fight that was never his. A simple traveler had no place protecting royal heirs. But then the memory of his own daughter surfaced again, a memory that tore at his heart. He had once failed to protect her from the cruelty of war, He had lost everything because he had been too weak. Now fate had placed another child in his arms. And though she was alien, though she was daughter to a queen, she was still just a girl who needed warmth and safety. Cale leaned closer and whispered firmly, "I do not care who your mother is. I do not care about thrones or crowns. What I care about is that you are alive, and as long as you are with me, I will not let them take you." His words carried no hesitation, only conviction. The girl looked at him in disbelief. Her violet eyes widened as though she had never heard such words before. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Instead, she simply clung to him tighter, her face pressed against his chest. For the first time since he had found her, she stopped shaking. The silence between them did not last long. A sudden crash echoed from nearby streets. The hunters were sweeping closer, their voices carrying through the ruins. Cale's body tensed as he peered through the broken wall. He could see their armored figures moving with precision, scanning each ruin, their drones circling above. They were closing in fast, and Cale knew that the truth he had just learned made their mission far more dangerous than he imagined. He pulled the girl back into his arms and whispered, "Stay quiet. No matter what you hear." He shifted his grip on his knife, knowing it was a poor weapon against armored soldiers, but it was all he had. He adjusted the coat around her small frame and pressed her close as he prepared to move again. His mind was no longer only on escape. It was on survival, not just his but hers too. Cale took one last look at her frightened face, and in that moment he made a silent vow. He would not abandon her, not to slavers, not to hunters, not to anyone. Even if she was the daughter of a queen, even if the entire galaxy wanted her, he would protect her. His steps grew steady again, and with her small arms wrapped around his neck, he slipped back into the ruins. Above them, the night sky seemed heavier, as if the stars themselves were watching the dangerous path they had chosen. Cale could not know what awaited them ahead, but one truth was clear. This was no longer just a chase for survival. This was the beginning of something far greater. The humans' decision, the ruins stretched endlessly, broken towers rising like jagged teeth under the cold starlight. Cale moved silently, each step careful, each breath controlled. The girl lay quietly against his chest now, her trembling reduced but not gone. Her violet eyes peeked out from the folds of his coat, wide and fearful, yet there was a small spark in them. A fragile trust beginning to take root. Cale felt it, and though his body ached and his mind screamed that he was stepping into danger far greater than he ever wished for, something deep inside him had already made a choice. He would not leave her, no matter the cost. They found a broken shelter at the edge of the colony where the walls still stood strong enough to hide them for a while. Cale lowered the girl to the ground gently. She looked at him with nervous eyes, as though waiting for him to say the words she feared most, that he could not help her any more. But Cale only crouched beside her, running a rough hand through his hair as he thought of the madness he had stepped into. He could still leave. He could walk away before the hunters closed in again. But then he looked at her small frame, wrapped tightly in his coat, her skin pale from cold, and his decision was already sealed. The memory of his daughter returned to him. Sharp and painful, he saw her small face, her smile, and then the way war had taken her from him. He had sworn never to care again, never to risk his heart. Yet here he was, holding another child, alien but innocent, fragile but precious. Fate had given him a chance to do what he had once failed to do, to protect, to save. Cale's jaw tightened as he whispered to himself, "Not this time." The girl broke the silence, her voice soft but steady. Why do you help me? You do not know me. You could die because of me." Her words carried a weight far beyond her years, the voice of someone who had already seen too much suffering. Cale looked at her, his eyes firm. "Because you are just a child, because you should not be hunted like prey, and because, once, I failed to protect someone I loved. I will not fail again." Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She looked at him as though trying to understand a kind of strength she had never seen before. Slowly, she nodded and whispered, "Then I will trust you." Kyle reached into his pack and pulled out a small ration bar. Breaking it in half, he handed the larger piece to her. She hesitated at first, then took it with both hands and ate quickly. Hunger clear in her movements, Kale ate the smaller piece in silence, his thoughts turning to the hunters. They would not stop. They would sweep the ruins. They would track them until there was nowhere left to run. If he wanted to protect her, he would need more than speed. He would need to outthink them. As he studied the broken walls around them, Kale's mind began to shape a plan. The ruins were filled with dangers: collapsed structures, unstable floors, live wires from ancient power grids. But those same dangers could become weapons in his hands. He knew how to turn the environment into a shield. He had done it in countless battlefields before. Traps, distractions, ambushes, all the tricks of survival he had once used to stay alive could now be used to protect her. The girl watched him curiously as he began to move around the shelter, shifting debris, setting loose stones in ways that looked careless but were carefully placed. He wedged beams so they would collapse with the slightest touch. He created paths where he could move quickly but enemies would be slowed. She tilted her head, her voice soft. "What are you doing?" Kyle glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Making it harder for them to catch us." For the first time, the girl let out a tiny laugh, fragile and quick. It was so faint Kale almost missed it, but it warmed something inside him. He had given her a moment of hope, and in return, it gave him strength. The night dragged on, but Kale did not rest. He worked silently, preparing the ruins. His mind was focused, his body moving with purpose. By the time he finally sat beside her again, his traps were set. He looked at her, curled up in his coat, her breathing finally even as sleep pulled her away from fear. For a long moment he simply watched her, and in that stillness, he realized just how much had changed in a single night. He was no longer a traveler wandering the galaxy with no destination. He was no longer a man running from his past. He had made a decision, one that tied his fate to hers. He would protect her not only because she was the daughter of a queen, not only because she carried the weight of an empire on her small shoulders, but because she was a child who deserved to be safe. He would fight, he would bleed, he would face whatever darkness came, because to walk away now would mean losing himself all over again. As the first light of dawn crept across the broken horizon, Kale tightened the straps on his pack and adjusted the knife at his belt. His eyes hardened with resolve. He knew the hunters were still out there, waiting, searching, relentless. But he also knew that he was ready. This was no longer about survival alone. This was about a promise, a choice, and a decision that could not be undone. And in the cold silence of the ruined colony, Kale whispered to the sleeping girl, "They will not take you. Not while I still breathe." The Queen's shadow far away from the ruined colony. Across the silent void of space, a fleet of warships drifted like shadows among the stars. Each vessel bore the royal crest of a mighty empire, their armor plates shining faintly under the glow of distant suns. At the heart of this fleet, inside the largest vessel known as the Throne Carrier, sat the Queen, her presence heavy with power and sorrow. She was a figure feared across the galaxy, a ruler whose name made entire systems bow. Yet now her throne felt empty, her crown heavy. Because her daughter, the lost heir, was gone, the Queen stood before a massive display of star maps. Her eyes, a fierce silver that once struck fear into her enemies, were now clouded with pain. Advisors surrounded her, their voices tense as they reported failure after failure. Search parties had combed dozens of colonies. Fleets had been dispatched to every border. Spies had been paid in secret across alien markets. Yet the girl remained hidden. The Empire's enemies whispered in delight, spreading rumors that the heir was dead. Some even claimed the Queen herself had lost control, that her reign was weakening. The Queen's hands tightened on the edge of the map table, her sharp claws digging into the metal. She dismissed her advisors with a single look. When they were gone, she closed her eyes and let the mask of steel fall from her face. Alone, she allowed herself to whisper, "My child, where are you?" Her voice was soft, breaking in a way no subject had ever heard. To her people she was unshakable. But in this quiet moment, She was a mother desperate and grieving. Meanwhile, Cale moved carefully through the ruins, unaware that the shadow of an empire stretched across the stars, searching for the very girl in his arms. The morning sun had broken through the clouds, painting the destroyed colony in pale gold. But the light brought no comfort. The hunters were still out there, and Cale knew they would strike again soon. The girl walked beside him now, still wrapped in his coat, her small hands clutching the fabric tightly. She was tired, but her steps were steadier than before. Her trust in him had grown, and Cale felt the weight of that trust like a chain binding him to her fate. As they crossed a cracked roadway, Cale noticed fresh marks on the ground. Boot prints. Heavy and recent, the hunters were close. Too close. His mind raced. He had spent the night setting traps, but they would not hold forever. He needed to keep moving, to find a way out of this colony before the noose closed around them. Yet every path seemed blocked, and every shadow whispered danger. The girl sensed his unease and tugged gently at his sleeve. Her voice was small but certain. "You will not leave me." "Right." Cale looked down at her, his eyes steady. "Never." What Cale did not know was that the Queen herself had just received her first real lead. A message from one of her hidden spies whispered of a sighting. A child with violet eyes and silver skin seen in the ruins of a burned colony. The Queen's heart surged with hope and dread. If the information was true, then her daughter was alive. But it also meant the hunters were close. She wasted no time, ordering her personal guard to prepare for departure. Her massive warship turned toward the distant colony. Engines roaring with fire, the galaxy would soon tremble. For wherever the Queen went, armies followed, back in the ruins. Cale guided the girl through a maze of broken alleys. His ears caught the faint hum of drones above, the growl of mechanical beasts prowling the streets. He cursed under his breath and pushed forward. At one point, they ducked into a collapsed tunnel, the air thick with dust and silence. The girl leaned against him, her breathing uneven. Cale's mind churned with questions. He had heard her confession the night before, that her mother was the Queen. But now the truth pressed heavier on him. If her mother was truly the ruler of an empire, then this child was not only valuable, she was the key to entire wars. Cale wondered what kind of woman her mother truly was. He had heard stories of the Queen, tales of a ruthless conqueror who crushed enemies without mercy. Some said she was a tyrant, others called her a savior of her people. But to Cale, those stories mattered less than the truth he saw in the girl's eyes. To him, she was not the heir to a throne. She was a frightened child who deserved protection. That was enough. The day wore on, the ruins growing quieter. But Cale knew it was the kind of silence that came before a storm. He set the girl down to rest for a moment, crouching beside her as he studied the skyline. His instincts screamed that something was coming, something far larger than a patrol of hunters. The air itself seemed tense, as though the colony was holding its breath. He could not shake the feeling that unseen eyes were already watching them. Far above, hidden in the atmosphere, the Queen's flagship entered orbit. Cloaked in shimmering fields of energy, from its shadow, smaller vessels began to descend silently, elite soldiers preparing to land. The Queen herself stood at the viewing deck, her eyes locked on the burning world below. Her voice was low but commanding as she spoke. "Find her, bring her to me, and no one will stand in my way." Cale did not yet know that the girl's mother was so close, nor did he know that the choices he had made had already changed the course of fate. He only knew one thing, that no matter what forces came, no matter what shadows loomed across the stars, he would fight to protect her. And as the hunters gathered for another sweep, and the Queen's army prepared to descend, the ruined colony stood at the edge of a storm that would decide far more than one child's fate. The final stand. The ruins groaned under the weight of silence. Cale's every step echoed against broken stone as he guided the girl deeper into the heart of the colony. The morning had stretched into afternoon, and the light of the sun spilled through holes in collapsed towers. Painting sharp shadows across the ground, Cale's instincts told him the hunters were close. Too close, and the quiet had grown unnatural. He stopped often, crouching low, listening for the faint hum of drones or the distant grind of armored boots. Each pause made the girl's grip on his arm tighter. Her violet eyes filled with fear, but also with a trust she no longer questioned. As they moved into what looked like an old power station, Kyle's unease deepened. The station was half buried in rubble, its broken walls leaning dangerously, but its wide-open floor gave him space to see any approaching threat. He set the girl behind a half-collapsed console, crouching down to meet her eyes. His voice was low but steady. "Stay here. Do not move, no matter what you hear." The girl bit her lip, fear filling her gaze, but she nodded, whispering, "You will come back." "Right." Cale's hand brushed against her shoulder, firm and certain. "Always." Moments later, the silence shattered. The heavy sound of armored boots thundered through the broken station. Voices barked orders in sharp alien tongues, and beams of harsh light swept across the floor. Cale's muscles tightened as he drew his knife, the cold steel feeling pitifully small against the rifles carried by the hunters. Still, he moved with the steadiness of a man who had faced impossible odds before. He slipped into the shadows of twisted metal beams. Waiting as the first squad entered, the hunters spread out in formation, their red visors glowing in the dim light. They moved with precision, scanning every corner, their weapons ready. One of them spotted the console and moved toward it, his steps heavy. Cale's eyes narrowed. He could not let them reach the girl. His body coiled. And when the hunter stepped too close, Cale struck. His knife drove into a joint between armor plates, and the alien soldier let out a mechanical hiss as he fell. Cale grabbed the weapon from his hand before the body hit the ground. The sound drew the others. Shouts erupted. Beams of light snapped toward him, and energy bolts tore through the air. Cale dove behind cover, the stolen rifle pressed against his shoulder. He fired back, the blast echoing through the chamber. The girl covered her ears and pressed deeper into the shadows, her heart pounding as she watched flashes of light reflect across the station walls. The battle raged. Cale moved from one piece of cover to another, his movements sharp and unpredictable. He used the traps he had set earlier, collapsing debris onto the heads of soldiers, luring them into unstable floors that cracked under their heavy armor. Each fallen hunter bought him a little more time, but the numbers were against him. For every one he struck down, more poured in through the broken doors. The girl could barely breathe as she watched him fight. To her eyes, he was not just a man, but a storm. Fearless and unyielding, he fought with nothing but raw will and cleverness, standing against enemies armed with technology far beyond his own. Still, she saw the strain in his face, the blood on his arm where a bolt had grazed him, the way his breathing grew heavier with each passing moment. Then the sound changed. A deep roar split the air, shaking the ruined station. Lights brighter than any search beam poured through the holes in the roof, and the hunters suddenly stopped. Their voices turning frantic, Cale ducked behind cover, his stolen rifle shaking slightly in his hands. The girl peeked out, her eyes widening in shock. A massive ship was descending above the ruins, its shadow covering the entire station. It was not another squad of hunters. It was something far greater. The ship landed with a thunderous crash, dust and ash exploding into the air. The hunters froze as a ramp extended from the vessel, and from its blinding light stepped figures unlike the soldiers Cale had fought. These warriors wore armor gilded with royal sigils, their weapons sharp and gleaming. But it was not them who held the power. It was the figure who walked between them, the Queen. Her presence filled the station like a storm. Her tall form, clad in royal battle armor, her silver eyes glowing with an intensity that silenced even her soldiers. Her voice rang out, low and commanding. Enough. The hunters, who had been so relentless, bowed their heads in fear. Cale tightened his grip on the rifle, his body bracing for death. The Queen's eyes scanned the wreckage until they fell on the trembling girl hiding behind the console. For a heartbeat, her face broke, her hard expression melting into raw relief. Her voice, usually sharp as steel, softened. "My daughter." The girl stood slowly, her body shaking. She clutched the coat tighter around herself, tears falling as she whispered, "Mother." She stumbled forward, and before Cale could stop her, she ran into the Queen's arms. The Queen dropped to her knees, pulling the child close, her armor forgotten as she wrapped her daughter in warmth. Cale stood frozen, his chest rising and falling as he lowered the rifle. His body was bloodied, his mind exhausted. He expected the end. He expected the Queen's soldiers to strike him down where he stood. After all, he had touched their air, fought their hunters, and dared to keep her close. But instead of death, the Queen turned her gaze upon him. Her silver eyes studied the man who had risked everything for her daughter. Soldiers raised their weapons, waiting for her command. Cale met her gaze, unflinching, ready to face whatever judgment would come. The station grew silent, the dust still swirling in golden beams of light. Between a battered human and a ruler feared across the stars, the fate of 2 lives and perhaps 2 civilizations hung in the balance. The Queen's judgment. The great chamber of the ruined power station was silent. Only the faint hiss of dust and broken wires filled the air. The Queen held her daughter close, her armored form trembling as she pressed her cheek against the child's silver hair. For the first time in many cycles, she allowed herself to show the truth of her heart. Not as a ruler feared across the stars, but as a mother who had almost lost the most precious piece of her soul. Her soldiers stood in a wide circle, their weapons still pointed at Cale, their visors glowing with cold light, but none dared move until their Queen spoke. Cale stood tall, though exhaustion pressed heavily upon him. His clothes were torn, blood stained his arm and side, and his chest rose with labored breaths. Yet he did not lower his gaze. He had fought too hard, sacrificed too much to bow now. His eyes met the Queen's, steady and unyielding. He expected her to order his death, to repay kindness with steel, but he also knew he would not regret what he had done. His only regret would have been leaving the child to suffer, and that he had not done. The Queen finally pulled back, her silver eyes shining with tears that no soldier would ever believe if they had not seen it themselves. She touched her daughter's face, brushing away the dirt and fear, her voice breaking as she whispered, "You are safe, my little star." The girl clung to her mother but then turned, pointing back toward Cale. Her voice, though small, carried strength as she said, "He saved me. Without him, I would not be here." The Queen's soldiers shifted uneasily, their fingers tightening on their weapons. To them, humans were little more than stubborn creatures. Reckless survivors from a world too wild for civilized space. They did not trust him, and they waited for their Queen to strike him down. But the Queen's eyes lingered on Cale, studying the man who had wrapped her daughter in his coat, who had faced hunters and machines with nothing but courage. She rose slowly, her daughter still in her arms. Her armor glinted with faint light as she stepped closer. Each sound of her boots echoed like thunder in the chamber. Cale did not move, his hand still on the rifle but his finger away from the trigger. He was ready for her judgment, ready for death, but he would face it standing. The Queen stopped before him, her gaze sharp but unreadable. For a long moment, the silence stretched, then she spoke, her voice low but clear. "You, human, tell me why. Tell me why you risked your life for her, when she is not of your blood, not of your people, not of your world." Cale's jaw tightened. His voice was rough but strong as he answered, "Because she is a child, because she was cold and alone, because no one, no matter where they come from, deserves to tremble in the dark with no one to protect them. I did what anyone should have done, even if it cost me everything." His words carried no arrogance, no begging, only truth. The Queen studied him for a long time. Her daughter's small arms tightened around her, the girl's violet eyes pleading silently. "Do not hurt him," she whispered. The Queen's expression shifted, a storm of emotions crossing her face. To her, Cale was a threat, a stranger who had dared to touch the air of an empire. Yet he was also the reason her daughter still breathed, the reason her empire still had a future. At last, the Queen raised a hand. Her soldiers froze, ready to strike, but her voice cut through the chamber like a blade. "Lower your weapons." The order stunned them. For the first time, the Queen had spared an enemy with no demand. With hesitation, the soldiers obeyed, their rifles lowering slowly. She turned her full gaze back to Cale. "Human," she said, her tone softer now. You have done what many of my own failed to do. You protected her. You gave her warmth when she was alone. For that, I owe you a debt." Her words sent shockwaves through the soldiers, for their queen had never spoken of debt to anyone. Cale only nodded once, his expression calm. "I did not do it for a debt," he said. "I did it because it was right." The queen's eyes softened for the briefest moment, a glimmer of respect passing through them. She looked at her daughter, who clung still to Cale's coat wrapped around her small frame. And then she said, "From this day, humanity will no longer be ignored. They will be watched, respected, for one of their own has shown what it means to endure." Her declaration carried weight beyond the ruined station. It was a message that would ripple across the stars, shaking councils and rulers who thought of humans as lesser. Cale felt the weight of her words, but said nothing. He only glanced at the girl, who gave him a small, tired smile. In her eyes, he saw gratitude that needed no words. The queen turned sharply, signaling her soldiers to prepare the ship. She carried her daughter close, but before stepping onto the ramp, she paused and looked back one last time. Her voice echoed through the chamber. "Human, your name will not be forgotten." And with that, she disappeared into the light of her warship. Cale stood alone in the silence that followed, the coat still warm from the child he had carried. His body was battered, his future uncertain, but his spirit was steady. He had faced death and survived, not for glory, not for reward, but for a single act of kindness, and somewhere in the vast sky above, a queen carried her daughter home, while her empire whispered the name of a human who had defied fate. The ruins of the colony stood silent again, but the galaxy itself had changed, and Cale, though he did not yet know it, had written himself into history with nothing more than courage, compassion, and the decision never to walk away.